Hey everyone, thanks for joining this call on a Wednesday afternoon. Super excited to be here. My name is Sahil. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of Rattle. And today we have this amazing panel where we have Jeremy, Diana, and Rosalyn, folks that I've known for a few years at this stage, and I respect and I admire a lot. And I've learned a lot from them. So we can kick off with some introductions, and then we'll go into the meat of today's webinar or roundtable, which is this report that we put out at Rattle, which is State of RevOps, and there were 6 interesting findings or counterintuitive findings that we got, which we thought would be interesting to get industry leaders' perspective. So I'll start with introductions. So Jeremy is the Executive Vice President of Revenue Operations and Strategy at Insight Partners. Insight Partners is a large multi-stage growth fund based out of New York. Jeremy lives out of New York as well. Jeremy has decades and decades of experience. So started his career at Gartner, was there for 17 years, Jeremy?
Yeah, 16 years. Yeah, a long time.
Yeah, so Jeremy was there for 16 years, and then after that, and at Gartner, he led multiple divisions. So he started in engineering, which is new to me as well, which is semiconductors, and then moved to product, and then eventually into marketing. And since Gartner, Jeremy has been involved with sales and marketing and revenue strategy for the last 10 years at this stage, which is between AMA, GLG, CB Insights, and then most recently before Insight was at SalesLoft, which is an Insight-backed company where Jeremy led sales engineering, sales development, and eventually revenue operations. Thanks, Jeremy, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Next, Diana. I got to know Diana, I think a year ago, and since then have just been very impressed by her knowledge of the space and her insights. So Diana had a similar background to Jeremy, where she was part of large conglomerates for the first 15 years in her career across Visteon, KPMG, and NetApp. But Diana started in finance. And then after those 15 years, in the last 10 years, Diana found her way to sales operations, revenue operations, and has been leading these large teams at Cohesity, Tanium, and then right now is the VP of Revenue Operations at SentinelOne. Thanks for coming on this panel, Diana.
Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Excited to be here.
And then third, we have Rosalyn. I've known Rosalyn for 2 years, but I've been consuming Rosalyn's content for the last 5. So it feels like I've known Rosalyn forever. And like everyone, Rosalyn started her career in telecommunications and networking companies for the first 6 years, and then she was she also started in finance like Diana. But then over the last 10 years, Rosalyn had led a revenue operations team at companies like Signify, DataStax, Clary, and most recently at Neo4j. And Rosalyn took the brave step of starting her own company. So she started Revenue Ops Collective, RevOps Collective, I think, Rosalyn, 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think it's been almost 6 months. Time flies, definitely.
That's phenomenal. And at RevOps Collective, Rosalyn does 4 pillar work, which is consulting, fractional RevOps leadership, coaching, and then as everyone knows, Rosalyn has been involved in so many communities over the last many years. RevOps Collective is a new community that she has started only for revenue ops and sales in general. And if you're not a part of RevOps Collective, I would highly encourage you to be so. Hey, Rosalyn, thanks for the years of connection, but also for taking our time today to join this call.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Cool. So we'll get started. I'll just quickly share the agenda of what we're going to talk about today. So there are 6 key topics that we want to talk about. So we'll go in a sequential order, which is the career path for for RevOps, what RevOps thought they will do and what our report found that they're doing. The age-old issue of ad hoc requests, and then going into how we think about our tech stack, how buyer behavior has changed now, and then finally ending with how macro headwinds is impacting RevOps as a function. Throughout the conversation, if anyone has any questions that you would like to ask the panel, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A and we'll pick them up towards the end. Our plan is to leave 10 minutes towards the end for Q&A. So with that, I guess the very first interesting finding that we got from the report was 90% of RevOps professionals feel that leadership or their company's leadership views RevOps as a strategic driver of value. But when we asked the same audience that, hey, do you think your career trajectory is well defined? The answer came back that it actually more than half of the respondents said that it's actually not, which is a big disconnect. Where if we think that RevOps is a strategic driver of value and the leadership agrees, then that should show up in career progression for the track as well. So I guess the question that I would love to maybe Diana open with you is, why do you think that is? Which is, if RevOps is a strategic function, then why do more than half of the respondents feel that their career path is not fully defined?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I thought the findings when I read the report was really interesting. I'd probably answer the question in a couple of different ways. I think the term revenue operations or RevOps, I think, is relatively new in the industry, right? It's sort of it's taken on kind of a life of its own, and it's sort of, you know, born from, you know, sales operations or sales finance and, you know, deal desk. It's like 5-10 years ago, it meant something different. So I think it's sort of just a new term. I'd also say that because it's new, a lot of what we do in my team is we're business leaders, we're business managers. Like it's nebulous at times what we actually do. I mean, there's people on my team that are definitely, you know, specialized in very specific areas, but leadership on my team, we're business managers. So we have that seat at the table, but could I tell you what my next role here is going to be, or what, you know, someone on my team is going to be? It's going to shape shift depending on where the business goes and kind of where the company goes. And so it is sort of, it's cool that we have that seat at the table, but it's also nebulous as far as where, you know, where the next step is for someone's career. So it is a really interesting space for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, if I were to jump in on this one, I mean, I get asked frequently by people at all stages, right? How do I get into RevOps? And then how do I progress in RevOps? And then what next after you're the head of RevOps? You know, to get into RevOps, I think that's someone asked me recently, like new college graduate, I basically said, look, you're probably going to come in as an analyst. And if you can get a Salesforce certification, like through Trailhead or what, you know, then go for it, right? That's going to make you a more attractive candidate. Once you're in there, you know, to that point of there are these functions, right? There's the revenue intelligence function, there's the comp quota, you know, territory planning kind of function, there's the deal desk function, and so forth, right? Like, I think to the extent possible, you can pick up, you know, that range of expertise across those different sub functions to position yourself to be a head of RevOps. And then I think for the RevOps kind of leadership, I agree, like from the leadership point of view, I mean, it's semi-terminal, but that's not a bad thing either, right? Like you can have an amazing career as a head of RevOps in your existing company or moving on. The piece I think that, you know, where people can go is potentially into a COO role, but there's a lot of rounding out that you need in order to make that transition, especially in project management.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And with Jeremy that, you know, there's so many different entry points into an ops role, right? Into revenue operations, or as we used to call it, you know, kind of go to market operations, field operations, right? You know, even though the last 10 years they've kind of been at startups, the 10 years prior to that, they've been at, you know, public large companies where sales ops really, we called it sales operations, but it really was end to end revenue operations. We just called it something different. I was actually surprised by this stat that 89% or close to 90% of RevOps felt that their organization saw the function as strategic, because I think that's one of the biggest complaints that I hear a lot is that they don't view the organization or the function as a strategic function and instead view it as much more of a tactical kind of admin function. So I'm really happy to see that. Definitely happy to see that, moving in the right direction. Maybe all of our joint efforts on touting why it's a strategic function have kind of come to fruition. But I definitely think that, the entry point into the career can be multiple points, and to that same point where you take your career can be multiple points as well. Right. I think a lot of times I coach individuals around if they're really data driven, or they're really into the analytics, or maybe they're more financial around planning, or they're more strategy, more technical. There's just so many different paths that they can dive deep into, as well as move up, but also move broad. Right. Because I think both of you, both Diane and Jeremy, you talked about kind of the deals desk comp, some of the things are traditionally sales, kind of middle of the funnel, but there's lots of entry points around the marketing, top of funnel, around, marketing automation and operations and strategy there, as well as post sales, right, in the SaaS world. Tons of customer success, enablement, support, services, implementation, all of that from an ops perspective as well. So I think there's a lot of room to grow in your career, whether that's into a C-level role or just across the funnel and then deep.
Do you think, Rosalyn, how RevOps perceives themselves, is there a difference between how larger companies perceive RevOps and how smaller startups perceive RevOps?
Yeah, I would say yes, but it's not that it's all large companies think one way and small companies think the other. I think it's just very, very dynamic around what the company needs and what they hire for, right? And this is one of the things when RevOps leaders are looking for a role, to really ask a lot of those questions around what does RevOps mean to you, right? And how do you see this function, and how does this function add value to the organization? But I do think in larger organizations, you're going to see much more silos, right? You're going to see specialists in each of the funnel, versus in a smaller startup, they want that, that unicorn to come in and, just you can do everything. You have deep expertise in every area, and you don't need to be resourced properly, which goes back to that kind of strategic function versus tactical.
One question that I get very often, maybe a few times every week, is I'm a revenue operations manager at my company. How do I get promoted to the director role? Which is usually the next step in the ladder. Jeremy, if your direct report, and I can ask you this because now you're an investor, hopefully your team is not listening to this, what would you answer?
To get promoted from individual contributor to director of RevOps, it is a combination of technical proficiency as well as leadership acumen. On the technical side, I think to the extent that you've mastered, I don't think you need to master everything. I don't consider myself to be a deal desk samurai, nor am I I know my way around Salesforce, but I'm not a Salesforce developer, right? So I don't think you need to get that technical. But so I think that's a piece. The other pieces are just on the leadership side. Are you a strategic problem solver, right? Do you break things down? I think people should really study what management consultants do. Do you break things down into issue trees to figure out what are the mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive ways to get at problems? And then I'll add one last thing, and I know Diana and Rosalyn will weigh in too, but you want to be a person who brings solutions, right? It's even I still see it everywhere I go. There are plenty of people who come with, hey, I'm noticing this, what do we do? And I think people who are identified as moving into leadership roles are the ones that say, I have identified this, and I've looked at it, and I recommend this solution, or I intend to do X, Y, Z. Do you agree? And even if the leader, the ultimate leader doesn't agree, you still showing that you're a strategic problem solver and not creating work for your bosses. I think that's a key. If you can take work away from your bosses, you're likely to get promoted.
Yeah, I'll jump in here. I couldn't agree more with that, Jeremy. Right? I mean, I think that it's the leaders on my team that have gotten promoted. It has to go beyond finding a problem, because we find problems all day long. That's, which I think we're going to get into ad hoc things and things like that. But problems come to my desk all day long. Every 15 minutes, I can go find a problem if I want to. Where it gets really interesting and where there's value-added players is when you can see a problem, you hear a problem, you can identify trends, you can stop, and to kind of what Jeremy said, you can break it down into, okay, what are the things I'll use less fancy words than Jeremy. What can I control? What can I change? What aligns to our strategies, right? There's a thought process there around what do I do about that? And then coming up with ideas. And then Where it gets really cool is not only coming up with ideas, because I also have people who are, ideas are also a dime a dozen. How do you execute against the ideas? How do you actually make meaningful change? Whether that's redesigning a process, whether that's finding a tool that does it. It's taking that kind of thought process end to end of problems to actually changing the way the business operates. That's where leadership needs to be thinking. And those are the people on my team that, get promoted and are, highly rewarded. That's what we're looking for. But that takes a special skill set, and that takes sort of a special sort of mindset around that.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, I agree about kind of this entire sort of the conversation with Jeremy and Diana, but I guess I would take it even one step further from there is then when you start to become that leader, you start to see things, right? We talk about the blind spots and seeing around the corners, right? But it's that real power of operations and for leadership in any role, right? To be able to see what's coming, right? Because everyone can see what hits them flat in the face, right? But you want to be able to see what's coming and not only come up with the recommendations on how to execute, but also all the pros and cons, right? Around your recommendations and having that thoughtful kind of curiosity and understanding the business enough, understanding the business well enough and understanding your customer well enough to be able to, figure out what is that next best action and then how to go and execute upon that. Yeah, I love that.
That's a pretty amazing thing, by the way, which is I think customers sometimes get lost in revenue ops training, which I think is a very point that you brought up. Cool. I think the second learning that or the second most interesting finding that we found was when you look at what RevOps people expected they will do in their role and what they end up doing, two areas were very stark. So one was they thought that they will do a lot more strategic planning and forecasting, but that was like the delta there was 24%, which is less than half. And then if you look at, they thought that 3% they will spend 3% of the time on just managing ad hoc requests. It ends up being 1/3 of their entire day. Jeremy, if I can ask you, sure, there is a delta there, and we will talk about why there is a delta, but and how we can fix it. But why is there an expectation mismatch? Why are people coming into this role thinking that they will do a lot more strategic work and less ad hoc, and it ends up being the opposite?
I think everybody wants to be doing more strategic work in general. So I think that explains the expectation side. I think the ending up on the ad hoc side is partly within their control and partly outside of their control. I think the outside of their control is, right, the reality is you are in the service of your CRO and your sales leadership, and therefore, and those people are they're not always long-term strategic planners themselves, so they're asking for things. So here's what I think is under the control of the RevOps person. First is I was talking very recently with Elena Ballin, who's the head of RevOps over at Wiz, which is one of our hyper-growth portfolio companies in the security space. And she was saying one of the things that she does is that she puts down basically what is the strategic plan for RevOps for each. She calls it an annual plan, but she says she updates it quarterly. So I'm going to call it a quarterly plan. And it's really clear in there both what they will do and what they're not going to do in that quarter. And that way, that gives them a little bit of a way to say no, because you do need to prioritize. So that also gets at, I think, one of the things that I think is like we are our own worst enemies, which is I'm this way, and I think many people in RevOps are in this role because we appreciate serving, right? That's like we're almost like CSMs in disguise in a way, but we're internal CSMs to our partners, and we're people who like to say yes, right? It's hard for us to say no. So I think having that strategic plan and then really asking yourself, taking a pause when you get that question, should I do this? Does it need to be done? Is it aligned with one of the things that I'm doing?
My biggest takeaway, Jeremy, from what you just mentioned is having a list of things that we won't do. I don't think I've ever heard that, but it's such a powerful idea, which is if you are very clear, then you can look at incoming requests that are coming in, and you can look at that list and say, hey, we have already decided that this is something that is a no-go. Diana, is that something that you have, or are there other things that you have done in your org to make sure that it's not just ad hoc requests, it's strategic work that RevOps should be driving?
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of a fine line, right, to what kind of Jeremy's outlining. We do as well on my team. We call it an annual plan, but yeah, to be very fair, it's quarterly priorities. And it isn't that they have to all be accomplished in that quarter. It's sort of the Google OKRs, little toned down, but it becomes the North Star for my team, right? We talk about the vision of what we want to accomplish, and I am a strong proponent of writing it down, having it on a slide, talking to leadership about it, and reminding my team what we're working on, just so it's there. And then we regularly check in on the priorities. So there's a little bit of that. I don't know if I could ever write down what I'm not going to do, because the CRO is just going to call me late at night and tell me to do it anyway. But I like the idea. I might try that next quarter. I just think I might lose that. But I do think it's a balance of, I agree with what Jeremy said, that I think strategy is an overused word. I think everyone wants a strategy job. Strategy jobs, again, I'm not cool, interesting, but that's just the basic part of it. It's the balancing of I've got fires, I've got things I need to build, and it's a circular motion. And you can never kind of lose track of that. You have to have a balance on both, and you have to have your eyes on both. And so a lot of times, like on my team, I encourage my team to block a couple hours off on your calendar every day. Like block it off, and then that time is the time you use for these priorities we talked about. And when you do that, you start to find that you have to hold to it. Back to like what Jeremy said, we are also like, my team always makes everyone's hopes, wishes, and dreams come true. I kind of tease them about that, right? We're there to make people's dreams come true. So it's hard for people to hold to that. But if you block time off every day, every week, it gives you a time to go back and reflect and go, okay, wait, what was the North Star of this quarter? What was I supposed to be implementing? What was I supposed to be changing for long-term growth? What was I supposed to be building for laying infrastructure for that next round of growth? It's hard to do, but you have to deploy tactics of how you think about your day, your week, your quarter to really accomplish those things.
I
was sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I just wanted to just double underscore that when I was at SalesLoft, every quarter we had in RevOps like a thing. We're going to nail forecasting this quarter. We're going to nail CS health scoring this quarter. We're going to nail account scoring this quarter. So I'll just, I just wanted to reinforce that by way of example. Sorry to interrupt you, Rosalyn.
Yeah, no problem at all. No, I was just going to say, yeah, definitely. I think having a RevOps sort of a roadmap, we call it a roadmap of all the things that you're going to be accomplishing. And it is iterative, right? Things are going to come off the roadmap. Things are going to come on, right? But it's those high level bullet points of what are the big things that we're going to achieve. And they're always tied back to the go-to-market strategy, right? Talking about strategy, right? It's like, what is the company trying to achieve? What is the go-to-market organization trying to achieve? And everything that RevOps is doing should support those things. And if they're not tied back to the strategy or things that are critical for the business, then they're deprioritized, right? And I think going back to we always like to say yes. I always tell people, it's like, I almost never say no. Maybe that's part of being a parent, but also I never say no, but it's always about yes, if, right? Yes, when, yes, if these things happen, or yes, but these things need to happen. And it's always going back to your roadmap and saying, well, how does this compare to the other things on the roadmap in terms of priority? How does this affect the goals? What's the impact? And doing that assessment before taking things off or adding things on. And it's very easy to say when your CMO comes to you and say, I need to do this, to say, oh yeah, that's great. Let's do that. Let's take a look at what we're going, let's look at it in the context of priorities against the other things that we're working on. And then you maybe quickly deprioritize something else, or maybe quick, like, okay, that's not that important. We can do something else around that. So it's just another way of looking at it.
I think one thing that I've on my team has made me realize that if I go to them with any request, they will never say no. They will always say yes. And then if they are working on any higher priority items, then that will just go out of the window. So my advice to other CEOs and CROs out there is hey, be cognizant of when you ask for something from your RevOps team, because when you do that, you might just need it for a very small percentage of your job, but that will become 100% of this job for the next week or so. So on that topic, Rosalyn, I would love to do a bit of a deep dive here, which is when we think of our ad hoc requests, when we surveyed RevOps professionals across different industries and company sizes, one thing was very consistent, that they are spending 2/3 to 3/4 of their time on ad hoc requests, data gaps, and process adherence, which I understand are three very different buckets, but these are all requests that will come up that aren't part of their usual day-to-day or when we are planning for the entire quarter or the year. Have you seen anything big work, which is how do you reduce the number of these requests that come in?
Yeah. I think this is the firefighting versus being, being sort of that fire prevention, right? That balance. I think Diana touched on sort of that real key to being successful in ops is really being able to balance the strategic and the tactical and figuring out what makes sense. But I can't say enough about being proactive, right? We talk about being reactive, but it's not about finding time to be proactive. It's about a way of thinking, right? It's your mindset around getting in front of these things. And you think about the key to being less of a firefighter and more fire prevention is you've got to get your house in order, right? The things that you touched on here are ad hoc requests, process, right? I think you said the other point was data. So if you think about those things, there's lots of things you can do in the front end to get your house in order, right? Data strategy, having process that gets continuously updated and iterated upon, and having that structure built, again, kind of going back to the roadmap, right? Having as much of that foundational things that it's going to be iterative. It's going to change. We all know that it's going to be agile, but laying something out that's written and start to build that out, because otherwise you'll never get your house in order, right? If you'll always be firefighting if you don't start to put some of that foundational infrastructure in place, no matter how small, right? It's iterative, it's small, it's kind of I hate to say this, but it's kind of a stop the bleeding, kind of that whack-a-mole game, right? Where you're just trying to keep things moving and keep the balls up in the air when you're juggling. But being able to start to lay some foundation down so you start to have some repeatable process. Otherwise, you're just in this constant loop, right, of being reactive.
And Diana, if I can get your perspective on, has there anything that worked where we can, as a RevOps team, we can educate the sales team on, which is like, hey, this is what you need to do to make sure that we aren't just firefighting.
Yeah, I'm smiling because it's like, are they going to listen? I'm kidding. No, I mean, my role here is really collaborative with our CRO, right? It goes back and forth around, we have conversations around, I can't do that, but how about this? And trying to educate sales. But at the end of the day, I tease, but I kind of mean it. They're out selling. They're out doing the really hard part of this. They're out making magic happen where magic probably shouldn't happen at times. So they're out selling. So I view my team's job of, we're that trusted advisor. And if they put trust in us, that we're like, to what Rosalyn's saying, I always say headlights in the business. We have headlights in the business. We hopefully know where the business is going to go in 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters. I know what the growth plan is. I know where we're going. My leaders spend a lot of time talking and debating that of, works today, what we have today, but is it going to work in 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters? That's for us to do, and for sales to sort of trust that we're working on that and we're doing it. But that doesn't always happen. There's, quarters, there's weeks, there's months where it becomes very tactical and it becomes very ad hoc because something in the business got away from us, or something came in from the left side and we just didn't have eyes on it. Like, that is also sort of the nature we're in. And so we have to kind of in some ways flex up and flex down, but sales typically understands that. I think we are blessed here where sales really does view us as that strategic partner. They put a lot of trust and faith in us. So when I say, hey guys, we can't do that for these reasons, we've got this going on here, that going on here, they generally listen. They don't always like the answer, but they generally listen and understand that there's trade-offs, but we're doing things for the long-term growth of the company.
I guess, Diana, on that point, what I sometimes see is RevOps will suggest using a tool to solve some of those issues, which brings us to the 4th point that I wanted to get your opinion on, which is when we ask this question to RevOps professionals, like 96% felt that their tech stack is not being fully utilized, which I think we all knew that that's true. It's hopefully it's not surprising, but it's also one of those things that the extent of this is just huge. How do you look at your tech stack, and how do you make sure that not only are RevOps getting the full value out of it, but they are able to implement this in the sales org and get adoption?
Well, in case there's anyone from finance on my team on the call, that 96% is not relevant to me. All that budget I have is highly utilized. I'm kidding. I think it's a great question, though. I mean, I'd answer it a couple ways, depending on the journey of growth that the company's, going through. Like I said a second ago, sometimes teams make really short-sighted decisions on something that will work this year for a strategy or will work the next 6 months for something. And the company quickly outgrows it. Like I've seen that before, where the choice of the tool that was made was really a very short-sighted tool choice. And the company and the growth or the strategies quickly got more complicated, or the company's growth quickly got bigger than they thought. And then all of a sudden the tool is no longer kind of relevant to what that next level of growth is and what that next go-to-market strategy is. So there's some of that. And then I'd also say that, and this might be a fairly unpopular kind of comment to make, I don't lead with tools, right? I lead with an alignment of what is the business trying to achieve from a strategy perspective? What is that process that we need to create? What's the people that we might need to hire to sort of support that? What's the tool we need? But the tool becomes very tertiary in some ways. But I see sometimes sales leaders or RevOps professionals, they go after the tool. And I have teams come to me all the time going, I want this tool. And I stop them and go, what's the business problem we're solving? What do you have a process to align to the tool? Because some tools are just tools. You still have to have a process. You still have to have a methodology. You still have to know how you're going to plug it into the overall strategy of what sales or marketing is trying to achieve. And so sometimes slowing my team down or slowing sales down around, like, we're not just jumping to a tool. Let's talk about the business problem. Let's talk about the strategy. That I think gets the utilization up, because then you're making choices more holistically, if that makes any sense.
And I would say it's definitely harder to do in practice when your team comes up with tool requests every now and then. Jeremy, if I can ask you a very tactical question, is how frequently would you do a tech stack audit?
I would say once a year probably is about right, because if you do it, with much higher frequency, it's a little bit knee jerk. I will say that probably 100% of our portfolio companies right now are doing a tech stack audit, just because we've now entered the age of efficient growth, and one of the levers of efficiency is consolidating or controlling your tool spend. I did want to just make a comment also on, I agree not to lead with tools, but I think when you do implement a tool, there's a blessing and a curse to the fact that buying is now done by committee, which is accountability gets very decentralized, right? And if the tool, it used to be, right, like if you made the decision to buy the tool and it failed, like your job could be on the line. And now, because of this distributed buying and all these different people involved, no one's job is really on the line. So I think this is something that like RevOps leaders or leaders in general can do, is to say, like, hey, there is a responsible party. So we did this in the last place I worked, where the CFO was very clear that if I advocated for a tool, like if I was the champion, then I was on the hook, right? So the last thing I purchased was an AI chatbot for support. And like the CFO made it extremely clear that, we were buying it for a very particular reason, to try to get CSAT and ticket deflection up to a certain percentage. And we were going to monitor that. And I was to report to him every quarter on how that was progressing.
Yeah.
I love that. Sorry, Rosalyn, just quickly, I love that. I don't think many CFOs do that, which is, hey, you'll be on the hook. There are buying committees now. And decision making is like decisions by committee are always average. They are never, you won't get exceptional results. So love that. Rosalyn, if I can just quickly interject, because to tie on to this point, which is the rise of PLG, which is buyer behavior has now changed. And a lot of people, when we ask like, hey, how do you usually get started? What used to happen was they will talk to sales and they will read case studies and then they will raise their hands. But now what's happening is that they're trying the product in 1/3 of the cases, or in the remaining 1/3, they are talking to their network and communities, and then taking those tools down to their sales team or to their executive team. How do you see this? How do you think companies should change their go-to-market motion, especially when the buyer behavior has changed?
Yeah, this is really relevant, because I know there's been a lot of reports around, how nobody wants to talk to sales, right? They don't want to talk to sales. They want to just be able to buy. And I think that the fact that by the time a consumer or buyer speaks to a salesperson at your company, they've already done all of their research, right? They already know, they've looked at your competitors, they've researched your company, they've talked to their network, they've talked to their peers, they've already had all of these discussions. So I think that it's really important for companies to focus on that thought leadership, that brand awareness, just being out there with lots of good content, being available on social, right? And really having that strong presence and content around what they do and how they do it. And then give away your product if you can, right? To give some of it to be able to, whether it's a video, whether it's a demo, where they can actually go use it for free if that model works for your product offering and makes sense. But being able to let people try and be perfectly aware of everything, because a lot of times by the time your buyer gets on the phone with your salesperson, they just want pricing. Right. Yeah. And a lot of times they're ready they want to know pricing, and then they want to know if you're a trusted partner that they can work with, right? That's going to help guide them and help them be successful. And so that's why I think it's super important to build your brand, have content available, and be as outwardly facing as possible.
Diana, if I can ask a tactical question again, is SentinelOne is a public company, and if buyers want to try out a product for free or sign up for a freemium plan, they usually have to give Salesforce access for most sales tooling. How do you think of that? Can your team just go ahead and try out a platform, or do they usually have to go through IT every time that they have to do that?
Are you asking on the SentinelOne side?
Yeah, so on the SentinelOne side, yeah.
Yeah, we don't. So our product doesn't actually function that way.
Oh, my mistake. I was asking, like, your RevOps team, like, can they just go and try out a platform, or do they have to get IT involved, get their blessing from a security?
No, you have to get IT involved, because we have lots of controls and lots of risk mitigation strategies and deployed at this point. So yeah, there's a heavy lift there to do that. It's much harder to do kind of the free, the premium, try things out kind of in the world that we're living in.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of world that we're living in, Jeremy, this brings us to the last question before we start taking we have received more than 15 questions here, which is almost 3/4 of our respondents have said that they have seen macro climate hit them. Obviously this is hitting their headcount, this is hitting the number of tools that they can buy, and it has also hit the number of folks that they're managing. I guess, given that your perspective is from an investor perspective at Insight, what are you seeing in the market overall, specifically for the impact of the macro headwinds on RevOps?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start broadly, right? Which is, what are the RevOps people in the companies that we work with focused on? I keep using this mantra of efficient growth. What does that actually mean? There's a lot of SaaS metrics out there. The SaaS metric that actually, I don't believe anything until I run the data myself. So I actually pulled data for about 150 public SaaS companies and looked at this particular metric, which is the rule of 40. A lot of people take it on faith. I don't take it on faith, but I can confirm that there's a quite strong correlation between the rule of 40 and valuations for companies. And the rule of 40 has two components. So it's growth and efficiency. The growth is ARR or revenue growth. And then the efficiency is usually free cash flow margin, which takes into account stuff like cost of goods sold, like that's your gross margin, but it also takes into account your operating margin, right? Sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue, R&D, G&A, and so forth. So if I were to double click on, getting to your answer, like on the sales and marketing side, the way that leadership or investors are looking at this stuff is they are following that tree, right? They're starting with rule of 40 and they're going down. And yes, they are looking for sales and marketing as a percentage of revenue, to be within an acceptable range. And that could mean tightening. And where the tightening, I think, is, the easiest to tighten is definitely tool spending. And we're seeing that, right? Extending sales cycles, more of a land and expand, right? Like people dipping their toes in rather than big purchases and so forth. So so definitely, it's kind of starting out there. On your RevOps team thing, I would say like at our portfolio companies, I have not seen a push to reduce RevOps in any significant way. I think what I am seeing is where people, were in hyper growth and grow at all cost mode. Now I'm getting a lot more questions about what's the right ratio of revenue operations people to, to salespeople at my company. They really, really want benchmarks for that kind of thing. And then, even this morning I got one. How do I build and structure like an efficient RevOps team? How can I do that with the least number of incremental headcount? So it was less about kind of cutting and more about just growing more slowly.
Yeah, I'd add to that, Jeremy. It's what sort of I've been seeing, right? It's not about cutting. It's more of, I think in, a year or two ago, it was, you need it. Okay, we can get it for you, right? You still had to build a business case, but it wasn't just, a free for all, but it was easier. I think now it is about how do you continue to support that growth, but how do you do it in a way that's maybe more efficient or more thoughtful, or there's a little bit of double click of more inspection. And so it is just trying to balance. And it is like to what Jeremy said, it's okay, how can you do that without me giving you 2 heads? I can give you 1 head. It's more of those conversations. And I think they're welcomed, right? I mean, we're all in this for a business to hopefully make money, be profitable, have the right margins. And so it's, when I get asked those questions, they're fair questions. There has been, I was smiling because there's been a lot of discussions lately with us around ratios. What's the right ratio? And that's so multi-layered and so multi-dimensional that, I could sit here for 3 hours and talk about what I think the right ratio is, because it's so much more about different routes to market and different sales cycles and different types of selling and different geographies. And it's so multi-layered that I call it like the Rubik's Cube of, I'm not sure I can actually give you guys industry standards or ratios when I get asked the question, but I'm happy to have the detailed conversation around why we're asking for, what we're asking for. So it's just, I think it's all healthy and very healthy debates in the market.
Well, I was going to ask you like what's the golden ratio, but I'll hold up on that.
I do have data on that. So I went on LinkedIn and did searches on this. I'll share a link in the Q&A. So Lindsay Mail had actually asked that question if I didn't bastardize her last name. So I put a link over there.
Cool.
I guess just given that we only have 1 minute, I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. One question that I'll pick from the Q&A, and we'll try to get back to everyone with unique responses in a one-on-one capacity. But as sales ops is sort of rebranding into RevOps, like how does one transition from sales ops mindset to RevOps mindset?
Wow, Sahil, I don't like the whole RevOps is something different from sales ops. I know we only have a few minutes. I'm not going to get on my soapbox about this one, but I know we focused a lot on sales, but RevOps is so much more than just sales operations.
Yeah, I'd second that, right? It's end to end. It's all the way from the first time, top of the funnel. We think we've seen something that could be interesting, all the way to order closure, to, commissions, to provisioning, to upsell campaigns and customer success, right? It end to end sort of covers it all. So when you think about, if I answer your question, it's more about learning. A lot of folks are very specialized here, but it's learning end to end, and it's popping your head up and be professionally curious to understand that when we make this choice here, how it impacts everything. Because really everything is tied together. The reason that we exist is because it all ties together in a spider web. It's figuring out if you can figure out how the spider web actually works. Like that's really the magic behind a lot of this.
Yeah, my add on this one is like you're often on the receiving end, right? As your organization may have CRO, CMO, and CCO who are 3 peers, and each one of them has their own operations person. And let's say you're a sales ops person or any of the other ones, and you want to diversify. I think the key is to like work collaboratively on projects and not be a threat, right? Is you want to partner with the marketing ops person, you want to partner on the CS ops person to help them shine, right? Like, I always try to routinely do that. And that's how I picked up CS acumen. It's how I picked up support acumen. It's how I picked up marketing acumen, by like being, again, like in service of those other ops people so I could learn and help the company.
Hey, everyone, this was amazing. Thanks for spending the last 45 minutes on just talking through the report and the findings and then giving your commentary on it. I took a lot of notes for myself, and I hope everyone who was listening did so as well. And again, we'll respond back on the individual Q&As by talking to this panel. But thank you so much for taking out the time. This was phenomenal, and can't wait to do this again in the next couple of months.
Thanks,
Thank
Sahil.
you.
Thanks for inviting us.
Bye.